My parents left me a falling-apart old house in a forgotten corner of Montana, while my younger brother Kyle inherited their pristine home in Lincoln, Nebraska. My wife, Veronica, called me spineless, said I lacked the backbone to stand up to Kyle. Then she kicked me out of our home, saying I could only come back after I proved I wasn't a coward. I drove to Montana, my heart split between pain and curiosity. I never imagined that this house, this strange, crumbling place, would completely alter the course of my life. My name is Grant Holloway. I'm 42 years old, and I work as a banker at a modest branch back in Lincoln. My life, if I had to sum it up, feels like a slow-moving river, steady, familiar, but never exciting. I'm not the type who shares much about himself, but since you're listening, maybe you deserve to hear how I ended up here, standing in front of a warped old house, holding a ring of rusted keys, trying to make sense of everything that's happened. I grew up in Lincoln, in a middle-class neighborhood where every house looked just like the next. White walls, red shingled roofs, perfectly cut lawns. My parents, Leonard and June Holloway, were quiet, hard-working people. My dad was an auto mechanic, and my mom taught third grade at the local school. They weren't flashy or loud, but they loved Kyle and me the best way they knew how, through sacrifice, through routine, through the constant reminder that family comes first. Still, something always felt missing. Our family history was like a painting with faded edges. Just traces of who we were before the suburbs. I'd picked up scattered stories, half-whispers, really, that my great-grandfather had Lakota blood. That he'd once hunted across the wide Great Plains. That my grandfather, Elias, worked on a ranch near the Bighorn Mountains. That at some point, they left it all behind and settled into city life in Nebraska. I never understood why we abandoned that part of ourselves. Maybe my father thought blending in would spare us judgment. Maybe silence felt safer than legacy. But sometimes I'd look at my reflection, at my thick black hair and dark eyes, and wonder, where do I really come from? Kyle, my younger brother by 4 years, never seemed to question any of that. He was the golden boy. Taller than me, more charming. He had this easy confidence, this magnetic way of getting what he wanted. When we were kids, he got the bigger slice of cake. The newer toy. Our parents' proudest looks. I told myself I didn't mind. I was the older one, after all. I was supposed to be the steady one, the giver. But deep down, I wondered if I'd been too eager to let everyone else shine while I disappeared into the background. Veronica, just saying her name makes something twist in my chest. We met 15 years ago at a colleague's wedding reception. She was from Omaha, daughter of a wealthy commercial real estate mogul. Blonde hair always in place, green eyes that could cut you or captivate you. She told me she loved how calm I was. How honest. You're not like the others, she'd say. You're dependable. I fell for her right then. We married 2 years later. Her parents gave us a house in the Lincoln suburbs, beautiful, but it never quite felt like mine. Like I'd borrowed it from someone else's life. Our marriage wasn't fiery, but it was functional. Veronica worked non-stop in real estate, constantly closing deals, managing showings, always on the move. I stayed at my desk job, quietly content. I liked numbers. Numbers made sense. But to Veronica, I wasn't enough. You just let people walk all over you, she'd say, pacing in the kitchen. Kyle manipulates you. Your co-workers outshine you. Grant, you're never going to make anything of yourself playing it safe. I didn't know how to respond. I didn't want to climb ladders. I didn't want to outdo Kyle or become something I wasn't. But each word from Veronica chipped away at me. Was I really weak? Had I let life pass me by? Everything shifted one windy March afternoon. I got the call no one wants. A nurse on the other end of the line told me there'd been a crash. A semi had lost control on an icy stretch of road. My parents hadn't made it. I don't remember driving to the hospital, only the crushing cold of the hallway floor as I collapsed in grief. Kyle arrived after me, composed on the outside, but I could see the tremor in his hand as he signed the necessary forms. At the funeral, we barely spoke. Veronica stood beside me, her hand in mine, but her eyes were somewhere far away. Maybe she thought I should be stronger. Maybe she hoped I'd stand up and claim something. But I couldn't. I was hollow. A week later, we met with our parents' lawyer for the will reading. I expected nothing. Our parents weren't rich, and I figured whatever they had would be split down the middle. But when the lawyer read it aloud, my stomach dropped. To Kyle Holloway, he said, we leave our home in Lincoln, Nebraska, along with all personal assets contained therein. To Grant Holloway, he continued, we leave the property located in Stillwater County, Montana, and all contents within. I was stunned. Kyle got the house. The house with family memories, with warmth and familiarity. A house worth a fortune. I got some shack in Montana. A place I'd never heard of. Kyle smirked, that sly grin he's worn since childhood. Guess they knew you preferred the quiet life, huh? I forced a smile. Said nothing. But inside, something broke. Veronica didn't hide her fury. On the drive home, she exploded. You're okay with this? She barked. A beat-up cabin while Kyle walks away with everything. You're the older brother, Grant. Where's your pride? It was their decision, I murmured. They clearly thought you were worthless, she snapped. And you just go along with it. You're pathetic. I didn't respond. I couldn't. Her words rang loud and true, maybe because a part of me feared they were right. That night, Veronica threw me out. Go to your little ghost house in Montana, she said, tossing a bag at my feet. Don't come back until you find your spine. I didn't fight her. I couldn't. I packed a few essentials, grabbed the keys the lawyer had handed me, and drove off before dawn. I didn't know where I was going emotionally, but geographically, I was headed toward Stillwater County. The house, according to the deed, sat on the edge of a town called Cold Creek. Tucked deep between pine-covered hills and winding dirt roads. As I drove west, something in me stirred. Not joy. Not fear. Maybe memory. When I reached the property, the sun had just dipped behind the trees. The house stood small and crooked like it had been forgotten by time. Shingles missing. A broken porch swing. Vines strangling what was left of the siding. But strangely, I wasn't disappointed. I was intrigued. This place didn't feel like a rejection, it felt like a question. I stepped out of my car, gravel crunching under my boots. The keys in my hand felt heavier than they should. I approached the front door and slid one into the lock. It stuck, and I had to shove the door with my shoulder. The smell hit me first, dampness, dust, time. Inside, fading light filtered through broken window slats. The living room was bare except for a dusty brick fireplace and a rickety table. No photos. No warmth. But there was something waiting. I pulled out my flashlight and began exploring. The house had 3 rooms, kitchen, bedroom, and what looked like a storage room. Everything was stripped to its bones. Empty shelves. Rotting crates. But then I came to the last door. It was different. Solid oak. Heavy. Carved with patterns I didn't recognize, suns, eagles, rivers. I tried every key I had. Nothing worked. I should have stopped there. But something pushed me forward. I noticed a small gap at the bottom corner, barely visible. I pried it open, heart thudding. Behind it was a narrow crawlspace. I slid in. My flashlight flickered on, revealing a small room no bigger than a closet. Shelves lined with objects, painted pottery, woven hides, an eagle feather headdress. And in the corner, an old chest. Carved with the image of a wolf under the moon. I opened it with reverence. Inside was a leather-bound book. The cover cracked, the pages yellowed. On the first page. To those who carry the blood of the Lakota, preserve and protect. Signed, Elias Holloway. August 15, 1947. A jolt ran through me. Elias Holloway, my grandfather. This wasn't just an old book. This was a legacy. Not the house. Not the worn-out walls. But this. What it held. What it preserved. I sat on the dusty floor, the smell of age and memory all around me, and turned the fragile pages like they might dissolve in my hands. It wasn't a diary, it was a record. A chronicle of our family, of the Lakota people. My grandfather wrote about his father, my great-grandfather, Tahatan, whose name meant spirit wind. He spoke of buffalo hunts under wide skies, sacred ceremonies beneath moonlight, and the ache of loss when their land was stripped away. He wrote of resilience. Of hiding these artifacts to protect them from looters, collectors, and museums who would cage their meaning in glass. I hadn't noticed the tears falling from my eyes until they stained the paper. I had never felt this close to my family. To myself. In Lincoln, I was just a quiet man in a cubicle. But here, in this secret room, I felt like someone with a story. I spent the entire night examining the objects. The headdress with white feathers, my grandfather said it had been used during rain rituals. The pottery urns held ashes of fallen warriors. A small drum covered in stretched deer hide still gave off a soft, deep beat when I tapped it. These weren't decorations. They were voices. The next morning, I called my old college friend, Dr. Tom Keller, an archaeologist at the University of Montana. I told him just enough to pique his interest and invited him to come. When he arrived and stepped into the secret room, his face lit up with awe. "Grant," he breathed, running his fingers gently over the pottery, "do you realize what this is?" He told me that these artifacts could be worth millions. Not just in money, but in historical value. Museums would offer fortunes. Collectors would fight over them. But even as he spoke, I knew. They weren't for sale. Tom offered to connect me with a native culture expert and left with a look of wonder still on his face. I stayed behind, poring over my grandfather's book, absorbing every word. He wrote about my father, Leonard, leaving Montana to spare his sons from the prejudice he had known. But he also wrote of his heartbreak, watching his son drift away from who he was. "If we forget our roots," he wrote, "we forget ourselves." Those words rooted themselves in my chest. I started cleaning up the house. I patched what I could. swept years of dust from the floors, wiped down every artifact like it was a sacred gem. And with each passing day, I felt less like a visitor and more like someone returning home. Then came the dreams. Endless grasslands. The sound of drums echoing in the wind. A man standing tall on a ridge with long braids and a gaze that pierced time itself. One rainy afternoon, a knock sounded on the door. I froze. I hadn't seen another soul besides Tom. I opened the door to a man in his late 60s. Weathered skin, silver braid over his shoulder. A calm presence like a tree that had survived many storms. "I'm Nathan Black Elk," he said. "Tom told me about your discovery." I nodded. "You knew my grandfather?" "We met." "Elias was a guardian of memory," Nathan said. "You are his blood?" I welcomed him in. When he entered the hidden room, he stood in silent reverence. He touched the eagle headdress with trembling fingers. "Do you know what you've inherited?" he asked softly. "These are not items. These are spirits. These are stories." Nathan told me of the Lakota, of the strength it took to carry their traditions through generations of erasure. "My grandfather," he said, "had hidden these items to preserve the story, waiting for the one who would carry it on. You were meant to find them," he said, placing a hand on my shoulder. "But it is not enough to possess them. You must protect them. Share them." I felt a fire in my chest. A purpose I'd never known before. But not everyone was thrilled about my find. A week later, Kyle arrived. He pulled up in a shiny SUV like he was arriving at a real estate showing. His suit crisp. His smile smug. "Heard you found treasure," he said, stepping into the house uninvited. "They're not treasure," I replied, already bracing for the inevitable pitch. "They're family heirlooms," he said, raising a brow. "Let's not be dramatic. Sell them. Split the money. I'll even give you back the Lincoln house in exchange. Win-win." His words hit me like cold water. I turned away from him and looked at the headdress, at the book. "They're not ours to sell," I said. "They belong to the tribe." Kyle laughed like I'd told a joke. "You've lost it, Grant. You really think a pile of dusty junk is more important than your future?" "They're more important than money," I said. "They're who we are." Kyle left in silence, but his final words lingered. "You'll regret this." That night, I stood outside beneath a sky filled with more stars than I'd ever seen in my life. No light pollution. No noise. Just a hush that made the world feel ancient. And I felt them. My grandfather. My great-grandfather. They were proud of me. But the next morning, Veronica called. Her voice was soft, almost sweet. "I heard from Kyle, about what you found. Grant, is it true?" "It's true," I said. "But it's not treasure. It's history. It's our family." She was quiet for a beat. "Then, Grant, be practical. If those things are worth millions, think of what we could do. A new house. Travel. Freedom. Freedom." The word clanged in my ear like a warning bell. "You don't understand," I said. "These items, they're sacred. They're not for sale." Her voice hardened. "You're still the same. Dreamy. Soft. Always choosing ideals over reality." "I'm choosing legacy over regret," I said. She hung up. But a week later, she showed up anyway. Dressed in a beige coat, her hair done up like she was visiting a client. She wrinkled her nose the second she stepped into the house. "You're actually living like this?" I said nothing. Just led her to the hidden room. When she saw the artifacts, her eyes widened, not with wonder, but calculation. These are beautiful, she said, picking up a pottery jar. If you're serious about selling, I know people. I cut her off. They're not for sale. Her voice dropped. Come on, Grant. Sell them and we can start over. I'll forgive everything. I stepped away. I don't need your forgiveness. I haven't done anything wrong. Tears filled her eyes, not love, but frustration. You'll regret this. But I didn't. Not for a moment. Because that day, I knew who I was. I was no longer Grant Holloway, the man who lived by everyone else's approval. I was Grant, descendant of Tahatan. Guardian of memory. Holder of a flame not meant to be sold but passed down. A few days later, another stranger knocked. He said he represented a private museum in Chicago. Said he'd heard from an anonymous source, likely Kyle. Offered $3 million for the entire collection. Promised a plaque with my name. Promised respectful display. They deserve to be seen by the world, he said. I shook my head. Behind glass. That's not respect. These aren't artifacts. They're stories. They belong to the Lakota, not a velvet-curtained exhibit. He gave me his card and left. But that's when the idea began. Not a museum. A cultural center. A living, breathing place where the Lakota and others could learn, remember, and reclaim. I called Nathan Black Elk. He brought herbal tea and a warm fire in his eyes. I shared my idea. He smiled, nodding. You're on the right path, he said. But you can't walk it alone. He introduced me to others in Stillwater County's Lakota community. Rose Little Deer, a weaver whose hands could tell stories. Thomas Redhawk, an elder who remembered every song. They welcomed me not as a stranger, but as kin returning. We fixed the house together. Rebuilt the roof. Repainted the walls. Cleared land for ceremony. I poured my savings into it without hesitation. But Kyle wasn't done. I found out he'd tried to sell the house through a shady realtor. Tried to claim co-ownership. I was furious, but Nathan urged calm. You are not your brother, he said. Your purpose is higher. I hired a lawyer and secured full ownership. That summer, the cultural center opened with a sacred ceremony. Smoke curled into the sky. Drums echoed like thunder. Nathan led the rituals. I wore a shirt Rose had embroidered. And I stood up, before the community, the tribe, and the stars, and I spoke. I used to think strength was about power, I said. But it's not. It's about knowing where you come from, and choosing to honor it. The crowd applauded. And a young girl, no older than 10, handed me a beaded necklace. Thank you, Mr. Grant, she said. Today, I feel proud to be Lakota. Her words were my reward. In that moment, I knew. I hadn't just saved a house. I had reclaimed a soul. And I would never walk alone again. If this story resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below and let's talk about it. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on more stories that speak to real life, raw truth, and the power of taking control. Hit that bell, and join the conversation.